Hey, I'm Mel.
And I'm Andres, and you're listening to
Mixtape, your favorite Afro-Latin podcast.
What she said.
Tengo Calderón, Yandel. ¿Quién va a ser? El Ondeldo.
Ella se entrega cuando baila reggaetón, haciéndole.
All perreo is reggaeton, but all reggaeton isn't perreo. In that a lot of reggaeton is too far out there, too pop, to have any sort of semblance of this sort of celebration that we have with our cintura, with our ass, which is required in order to perrear, right?
Today's track title is inspired by the song Cuando, Baila, Reggaeton, When Dancing Reggaeton, by Tego Calderón and Yandel.
Es de D.I.E. tirando la verdad, dirigido para esa gente de la alta sociedad, o mejor dicho, de la alta suciedad. Es de D.I.E. Muchos me miran como si yo fuera.
Today, we're listening to Censurarme, Censor Me, by Eddie D. Eddie D is a Puerto Rican reggaeton composer, singer, and producer born in Rio Piedras in 1977. Eddie is regarded as one of the pioneers of reggaeton in Puerto Rico in the 90s. One of his most known albums, and probably one of the most known reggaeton albums of all times, is a multi-artist collaboration called Los 12 Discípulos, the 12 Disciples, which feature 12 big names of the genre, including Tego Calderón, Vico C, Ivy Queen, and Daddy Yankee. Today's song, Censurarme, questions the censorship of the genre as an exposition of society's double standards. I think it's a great example of the part of the origins of reggaeton that was influenced by hip-hop in the US, and that presented social criticism in its rawest form. Eddie D. rhymes. Muchos me miran como si yo fuera un tipo sin arreglo, como si nunca antes hubieran visto un negro, como si fuera un delincuente, como si con el lápiz y con mi libreta yo matara gente. Many people look at me as if I was a ragged guy, as if they never in their lives had seen a black guy, as if I was a thief, as if with my pencil and my notebook, people I killed. Eddie D continues. Tal vez mi música no sea sana, pero yo no me inventé ni el sexo ni la marihuana. Pa'l carajo los que nos critican, esta es la música con que los jóvenes se identifican. Maybe my music isn't modest, but I didn't invent sex or marijuana. To hell with those who criticize us. This is the music young people identifies with. You can draw your own conclusions whether Eddie D was right about the double standards of society. I think he was. For now, let's enjoy some reggaeton knowledge. Welcome to track number 8 of our second season, Cuando Baila Reggaeton, When Dancing Reggaeton. This is Mixtape.
Welcome to the Mixtape Podcast, and thank you for joining us in our rhythm season. If you're a regular listener, we are so happy to have you listening in today. If you're listening for the first time, you should know that in this season, Season 2, we explore different Afro-Latin and African rhythms we encounter while social dancing. In one episode, we discuss the rhythm, and in the subsequent Were You Listening episode, we feature a song associated with the rhythm.
Sí, señor, así es. We discuss the history of the rhythm as well as the dance, the movement associated with it, and we also discuss how we can continue to center and recognize its black roots. Our season so far has consisted of Afro-Latin and African rhythms, including samba, the complex of Afro-Cuban rhythms, the blend of rhythms known as salsa, bachata, merengue, kizomba, and in our last episode, we dug deep into the Afro-Latin and Amerindian roots of cumbia. Check those episodes out, and let all that knowledge that our guests have shared with us soothe your soul and root your experience with the rhythms. For this episode, we are focusing on a rhythm that has exploded in popularity over the last 20 plus years. The rhythm we are talking about today is reggaeton.
Oye, en la Vallarta está el Gocalde con DJ Yo. Metiéndole cabrón, oye, esto es para ustedes, para que se lo gocen. Tengo calderón para que retocen. Vuelvo a nuevo, me siento al día en la mía, mami. Ya ando bien perfumado y la paca por si no fían sin misterio. Llénense de placer que se acaba.
All right, Andres, would you be surprised if I told you I had a love-hate relationship with reggaeton in the early 2000s?
No, I won't. Carry on. But seriously now, you seem to have had a love-hate relationship with several Afro-Latin rhythms. What's that all about?
Yo, I really don't know. But let me tell you the reggaeton story. So, in middle school and high school, reggaeton was popping. I lived in Florida at the time, and the teenager in me who didn't want to like what my sisters were liking was like, why do all these songs have the same core beat, and why are people rapping in Spanish? As if rapping in English was the only way someone could rap. But honestly, as popular as reggaeton was, there was no way I couldn't grow to like it.
You know what? Prudes. I should say, however, that my sister never seemed to have come around to like the rhythm. She was way too deep in alternative rock, and there was that, Kurt Cobain and that stuff. I, on the other hand, was just a teenage boy, always ready for a good dance to, get close to the ladies, and I liked it since I was like 15 years old. I loved Ivy Queen's statements of womanhood. I confessed to the world that I love me some double entendres, just like the ones in Cuentos de la Cripta parte 2. Mel, give me a beat. Quiere que le llenen el cubo de leche. ¿El qué? El cubo de leche. If you know, you know. And I loved El General's Rica y Apretadita. I may have a thing for ricas y apretaditas, so maybe that explains that, I guess. Anyways, I'm really excited about this episode, and I cannot wait to hear what our experts have to say.
Well, we've got a solid group of guests with us to help us not only learn about reggaeton as a rhythm, but to also help us center the Black experience within the rhythm and understand the rhythm as a tool for social and political commentary, expression, resilience, and freedom. To get started, we spoke with Dr. Beth Colón-Pizzini, who is an assistant professor of instruction at the University of Texas at Austin in the African and African Diaspora Studies Department. We asked Beth to tell us about the development of reggaeton.
Yeah, I think firstly, what's very important to understand is that reggaeton in its development and at its core is, despite its waves of globalization that have brought upon a whitening of the genre, it's an Afro-diasporic rhythm and a Pan-Caribbean rhythm. And there's a lot of overlap between these two terms, of course. So throughout its almost 40-year existence by now and its evolution, you could hear elements that are shared with US hip hop, salsa, merengue, Jamaican dancehall and reggae, Colombian cumbia, Trinidadian soca, Haitian compa, calypso, bomba, all of these Afro-diasporic genres have come together within reggaeton in varying degrees throughout its history. And it's something that, Wayne Marshall refers to it as the ultimate sonic amalgamation of Western Blackness. And so it's also important to then recognize that this amalgamation is happening or had been happening, and even to this day, happening within simultaneity and throughout time and space. Of course, you can't have reggaeton as we know it without Jamaican dancehall and reggae. And it could not have become a Spanish language companion to those genres if it wasn't for Jamaican migration to Panama to labor not only in the construction of the canal that the US was building to compete with these larger European colonial powers at that time, but also their descendants and the more contemporary waves of Jamaican migration to Panama to work the free trade zones and ports along the canal. So Jamaica and Panama are particularly important stops along the sonic train of this genre. It could not have been a genre that we know without this stop from Jamaica to Panama. And then from Panama, you have migrants, from the 80s and 90s, like El General, for example, who land in New York and try to make something of this music, try to find a larger opportunity with this music that they are, very proud of and that they are really experts in.
Oye, mami, tienes unas caderas que parecen carretera y en este día de lluvia cualquier cosa puede.
Tenía que ser un hombre. No lo trates, no. No me trates de engañar.
A ti nunca.
Sé que tú tienes a otra. Y a mí me quieres para.
And so that's where you find the connection much more directly with other Caribbean folk in city spaces like in New York. You have Puerto Ricans and Dominicans and even Cubans coming together with Jamaicans and Panamanians and other people of African descent to, not only be part of a youth culture that is burgeoning at that point, which includes hip hop, of course, because they were also involved in the creation of hip hop, but also something in their mother tongue, so to speak, in a more, Caribbeanized version of reggae that is already Caribbean, but it's giving a different twist to it.
Tú eres mi mamita rica y apretadita, mamita, mamita rica y apretadita. Eres mi mamita rica y apretadita, mamita, mamita rica y apretadita. Si tú la ves, amigo, no te puedes contener a un rayo de los cielos tú oyes caer. Mi primo que era calvo le hizo el pelo crecer.
From there, because Puerto Ricans and Dominicans of the 80s and 90s are going through this incredible change of massive globalization. The internet is now going to become this incredibly important tool that connects the whole world. That along with travel and migration, Puerto Ricans in particular, because we've had US citizenship since 1917, the traveling is made easier. So there's this sort of cycle of va-y-ven, as we call it, of like coming and going from New York or Hartford or Orlando or wherever, that is also then matched with a very Puerto Rican experience. So these youths were having, one foot in the United States and one foot in Puerto Rico, or having connections in some way. Their cousins were doing that type of migration and they brought certain music with them or certain practices and traditions. And then, so they were having this involvement within this culture, within both places, all at once. That's what I mean by simultaneity, this, travel and this migration throughout the 1900s and into the 2000s of Caribbean people makes this a very diasporic and admixed genre. You have not only the ease of travel and the sharing of this music with the internet, in particular in the 2000s, but even the infrastructure of touring gets better. These artists are becoming more known, their music is becoming more entrenched. And as they tour and perform more in other countries, that also spreads the popularity and knowledge of the genre. And so it's to the point that now you can hear reggaeton anywhere and everywhere. And you have artists that are not from the backgrounds found in, the roots of the genre, Colombia, Argentina, Chile, Mexico, Spain, participating and even becoming stars across the globe.
Dame tu cosita, ay, toma. Cosita, cosita, dame tu cosita, ay, toma. Cosita, dámela bien rica. Vámonos pa' acá pa' la esquinita, okay. Dámela que está bien bonita, mamacita. Dámela pa' aquí.
We also interviewed Katelina Eccleston, or La Gata, who many know through her platform Reggaetonconlagata, the first woman's platform dedicated to reggaeton analysis and history. Katelina is also the lead researcher on MTV's upcoming show De La Calle. Katelina contributed to this discussion of the development of reggaeton, highlighting the contribution of Panamanians.
So, I, being a music nerd, I think that there's reggaeton and there's reggaeton. In my opinion, Panamanians translated reggae in Patois, that is Jamaican, to Spanish, and then the AI made reggae in Spanish, made dancehall in Spanish, and then innovated in the studios with the Jamaicans, right? Nando Boom was in the studio as, this ritmo of Dembow was being created. He created then the song Dembow, like he translated it because of course it existed in Patois first. And so since I've seen that, there's this sort of innovation that occurred and very quickly, and it didn't go too far because Panamanians are very humbled. So I feel like, I have to give the flowers to my Panamanians for the innovation that they did with dancehall and how that further set the blueprint for what reggaeton is today. On the flip side, I feel like Puerto Ricans definitely heard the dancehall / reggaeton that Panamanians was creating and wanted to increase the BPM, create a structure that, fit a style that was more keen to them and their rap style. And that is what we know as reggaeton today, the innovative blueprint that Puerto Ricans have created based off of reggaeton that Panamanians made. I think that's the best explanation I can give that gives everybody their flowers, because I feel like now there's a legacy of like leaving Panamanians out or, saying that what they did wasn't innovative or doesn't impact what we listen to today. And I think that's false.
As you may have noticed by now, we always seem to find a whitening of Afro-Latin rhythms in our explorations. Beth also brought up whitening in reggaeton, discussing this process from a socio-political and economic perspective, touching on gatekeeping and white supremacy within this process.
That sort of becomes, once again, a very particular process that happens in simultaneity. So there is, within the Puerto Rican context, when it comes to whitening the genre, the entrenchment of the government and the policing and demonization and basically pathologizing of the people that create this genre within Puerto Rico, that is then also used in other countries as well, in Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Mexico, all of these places that have found that reggaeton has sort of found a home or a popularity. The powers that be, so to speak, find a way to attack because of, racist policies or racist understandings of their own nationhood and who their people are. And so that was one of the ways in which the sort of negativity that came, or, the negative reaction that came with reggaeton, as, more white or white passing stars became involved, it sort of became easier for these people to accept it. There was also the fact that this genre, as it became more popular, needed to find itself within radio play and public performances and TV award shows. And you can't perform songs necessarily if there are sexually explicit lyrics or, bad words and all of that kind of stuff. So the artists themselves had to self-censor a lot of the times what they were rapping about and singing about and the words that they were choosing to express that. And there's also the fact that in terms of capitalism. Once this genre becomes very popular, American markets, American labels become interested, whether it's a fad or whether it's not. They want a piece of the pie because they see that it's very popular in these markets that they could tap into and extract money from, whether it be in Latin America and the Caribbean itself, or within Latinx communities in the United States. So there's all of these things happening, across the Spanish-speaking world that affects the whitening of reggaeton, or that enables the whitening of reggaeton, that then becomes almost best practice in order for producers and artists and managers and labels to find some type of success, because gatekeeping Black people from the genre means that they can sort of control the product a little bit better, they can control the image of the genre a little bit better, and they can, of course, still work within these logics of white supremacy that is very global, and extract more money from that because, it's more desirable, it's more palatable, they're not being too offensive. And so you have all of that happening at the same time. And even within, the larger Puerto Rican context, you have a larger sort of moment in which reggaeton is transforming itself, that is being affected by our government, by religious institutions, by elite culture, at the same time that it's having encounters with other global markets and other global players.
Katelina added to this discourse by explaining shifts in the music industry and the albums that were being produced to support the association of the rhythm with whiteness.
I think this occurred twice throughout history. The first time, honestly, was with the acceptance of Daddy Yankee's Barrio Fino. That's an amazing album, but let's be real. On the flip side to the cultivation of that album, there was a cultivation of El Abayarle, which of course celebrates negritud en plena forma, que sea por bomba y plena, que es muy, muy boricua, 100% boricua, que también celebra salsa, pero en la manera que también celebra los timbales, right? The very African instruments, right? On the flip side to that, Barrio Fino was the album to convince the industry that this music can be mainstream and that it can be professionally produced and creado de quote unquote alta clase, which is very racist. And for this to sort of be a blueprint of sorts of la música que queremos ver en el futuro, which, don't get me wrong, again, the album is great, but the issue is there's an interpretation and a white association to this album because they're excited not for the African instruments there, but for how we can minimize that usage to create a sound that they want to sell. That's problematic. So, eso fue la primera. Y la segunda fue, honestly, when reggaeton touched Colombia, I was able to interview Maluma and Balvin for Live, and they have said verbatim, queremos crear un sonido más seco, o sea, el reggaetón de nosotros es un reggaetón seco. And I'm like, what does this mean? And they're like, tú sabes, sin timbales, una simplificación del ritmo. And I was like, oh, you guys are the culprits of creating a sound that que, simplifica demasiado, en mi opinión, el machuqueo del dembow, del reggaetón, right? They wanted to create a very pop sound that was created to be consumed universally, right? that assumption is like so problematic for so many different reasons. It's like as if people are gonna hear a drum and say, "Oh, I can't listen to that." Like, what is that? Pero just para que sepan, that was a very deliberate decision of this music in this very specific way. Yeah.
Como si nunca antes hubieran visto un negro, como si fuera un delincuente, como si con el lápiz y con mi libreta yo matara gente. Y cuando me asomo, hay un par que lo piensan para darme promo, pues tengo que joderme para que mi noticia sea publicada.
Reggaeton was seen as dangerous, and as you heard in our intro song, there were efforts to censor it. We asked Beth to tell us about these censorship efforts. We wanted to know why reggaeton was seen as dangerous and how the rhythm prevailed despite this perception and despite its censorship efforts.
So, you have to keep in mind that in its earliest expressions in the late 1980s and even early 1990s, in Puerto Rico in particular, and in other places that were doing reggaeton or reggae en español or even rap en español, this was a musical tool to communicate the reality experienced by those of the working class, of the underemployed class, the majority of whom were of African descent. And so they were highly persecuted, policed, and criminalized within Latin American and Caribbean societies. And within Puerto Rico, the earliest iteration of this music was also just being produced, written, and performed by working class youth in their teens and their 20s. So it was also almost like a generational war as well. And, this transformation of the culture that these older, mostly white elites were seeing. And they were very worried because these youth were talking about, not just sex and young people things, but they were also critiquing the over-policing of their communities. They were critiquing the stratification of class and the geographies and how the geographies matched that stratification, especially in the Puerto Rican context, where you have wealthier communities also sometimes side by side with public housing projects, for example, as the suburbanization of Puerto Rico was following the suburbanization of the United States in the 50s and 60s. So there was this hope that by having this close proximity within these two classes that were sometimes very much so racialized differently, that they would, the rich people would be teaching the impoverished people how to, pull themselves up by their bootstraps, work hard, and these mores of middle class and upper class Puerto Ricanness. And that project kind of failed very much so, to the point that by the time that we get to the 80s and the 90s, where this music is really being created and spread throughout these, more impoverished and exploited communities, the rich people start gating themselves off from these other communities. So not only do they gate themselves off, they also put gates around these communities themselves, especially the public housing projects, because there was a racial panic, there was a moral panic about crime, there was a moral panic about, even looser sexual mores at the time. And so they don't want to interact with that. They don't want to see the way that the youth of their country are very different from them, and that is threatening to them. And so we have this moment in which the government is raiding these, music selling establishments. They are raiding music video producers, their archives, essentially, of all the music videos that they have been recording with these new artists. They are raiding parties and clubs that are playing this music. There's this incessant need to stop crime at the time. And that means that you then have to over-police youth, because through their music, through their Blackness, through their lower class, status, they are already then pathologized as criminal to these elites. And so we see this rise in physical violence and policing from the state at the same time that you have these leaders, both secular government leaders, but also religious leaders in Puerto Rico specifically, trying to use very hateful rhetoric to help make sure that Puerto Rican culture and youth are being essentially fixed, that they're not being fully corrupted, that we can turn the course around to basically destroy this burgeoning genre and culture. But they failed, obviously. And it ended up being a thing that once they become very vocal about it, it provides, first of all, even more desire of people to listen to this music and to dance to this music and go to their parties, but also to promote the artists themselves. You have that moment of these artists and producers and music video directors having to really struggle to find a way against the government while still either moving in this globalizing path, like, for example, a figure like Daddy Yankee did, or keep critiquing and keep the genre as something that is for the people, that is saying something that is socially meaningful, politically meaningful, or even a combination of both, because that was also very possible and found within the genre. So it's, within that context that we see happening in Puerto Rico in terms of the policing and the whitening and the sanitizing, it's also going on in other places. You had similar histories of that in Cuba and the DR, in Mexico, within Latino communities in the United States itself. There was this rise of panic from older generations about this music as it was coming on stronger and stronger through, the radio and the internet and all of this. So there's this constant sort of demonization of the music that then demonizes the people that not only produce it and make it, but also even consume it, which is very unfortunate.
Atrévete, salte del closet, destápate, quítate el esmalte, deja de taparte, que nadie va a retratarte, levántate, ponte high.
Hey, I'm Mel, one of the hosts of the Mixtape Podcast. I wanted to take just a minute to remind you that the Mixtape Podcast takes an anti-racist approach to center the contribution of Black people and culture across the Latin American diaspora through dance and music. Follow us on Instagram at mixtape.podcast and click our link tree in the bio to learn more. Don't forget, you can find all our episodes on podcast streaming platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts, as well as on our website, tarheels.live/mixtapepodcast. All right, que siga el perreo.
As it expanded across the Caribbean, reggaeton has transformed and has played a role in the rise of new forms, including Dembow in the DR and Reparto in Cuba. We asked Beth to talk to us about this continuous expansion.
What I find very interesting and beautiful about music, and reggaeton in particular, is how it has traveled through the Caribbean and allowed us to know a bit more about each other. In terms of how it looks like today and the involvement of Dominicans today and Cubans today, the spread of reggaeton to Cuba was slower because of the internet being so censored in Cuba and all of that, but it still went to Cuba. They sort of took that same spirit that really powered Puerto Rican youth in the 80s and 90s to speak out against governments and express lived realities. They took that and they ran with it, and they went and talked about what it is to live in the 2010s in Cuba under Fidel and that type of government and that type of limitation and the way that they want to resist and the Cuba that they want to see. And it was banned back in the early 2010s in Cuba because of this, very similar to how it used to be in Puerto Rico in the 90s and 2000s. And then in the Dominican Republic, like they ran with the Dembow beat and just went to town on it and created something of their own, something that was very particular of theirs.
Yo juqueo y tengo mi Jordan pero en mi casa. Si te pironeo empeña todo y que fracasa. Tú me quieres dar pila de masa, pero si lo agarro te lo dejo arrugado como una pasa.
And it's very interesting when you sit down and listen to contemporary or maybe like 2010s type reggaeton from all three islands. You know, we're the Hispanic Caribbean, but politically and historically, we're very different in many ways. We have similarities, but, you know, we have Cuba, who is still under this very particular form of government. And we have the Dominican Republic that is independent, but still has a lot of extraction and, exploitation be part of its political and economic system. And then we have, of course, Puerto Rico, who is still technically a colony of the United States. So those very three particular government systems create particular daily lives for Cubans, Dominicans, and Puerto Ricans. And you can hear that in all three different types of reggaeton that have been created there.
Dice 38 grados, welcome to the calentón. Pregunta la receta que aquí tenemos el sazón. Somos la inspiración de toda la región. En USA y en Europa se apechan con este flow. Y vienen pa' buscarlo, pero no les sale. No pueden comprarlo.
Now that we have an understanding of the history and context of reggaeton and its development, we wanted to get into the musical components of the rhythm. To do this, we spoke with Inka, a rapper, music producer, educator, and cultural manager based in Villamella, Dominican Republic. Villamella is a special place in the Dominican Republic recognized by UNESCO for the retention and preservation of African cultural roots and heritage.
We asked Inka, how would you characterize the sound of reggaeton? Inka's answers are translated to English and read by Andres.
Bueno, rítmicamente, yo diría que el reggaetón.
Rhythmically, I would say that reggaeton is characterized by a sensation of constant back and forth, because reggaeton has that
Tum, pa, tum, pa, tum, pa, tum, pa.
I think that has a lot to do with that sensation of movement that reggaeton gives, and that other genres that have a similar matrix rhythm also give. It's that bounce feeling. I think that's one of the most characteristic things about reggaeton. And also, although it has changed in recent times, I would say reggaeton is also characterized by a sensation of organicity. In other words, reggaeton came to be as an organic rhythm. You didn't feel like they would get in the studio pretentiously, like sometimes even I get in the studio and say, let's create a piece of art. And I know many of us have said something like that. Instead, it was something more like, what's up? Drop me a beat and let me spit this that I wrote for my shorty. Or let me rap this out that I just wrote. Because they were simply living it, feeling it, you know? And I'm more specifically talking about the reggaeton that I grew up with in the early 2000s. So I think those two things. One that has to do with the emotion that the lyrics communicate, and the other that has to do with the emotion that the rhythm communicates.
We followed up with a question about Dembow. For someone who is less familiar with these rhythms, how can we tell the difference between reggaeton and Dembow?
Bueno, el dembow va más rápido a quienes son productores o músicos.
Well, Dembow is faster. For those who are producers or musicians, or those who know the term BPM, beats per minute, it has to do with the speed of the song. Reggaeton is usually located between 80 and 100 BPM, which sounds like this.
Bueno, que sería así.
Dembow usually starts at 115 BPM, and I would say even goes to 130 BPM. So there can be a difference of something like 20 BPM between the two. So Dembow has the same rhythm of reggaeton, which is, but it goes faster. And it also often has another rhythm that is very noticeable, and that you can also find in Congo de Villamella. It goes like this. So in the end, what you have is, I think that's a fundamental difference. Besides, I had mentioned earlier the sense of organicity that reggaeton gives you. Well, that it used to give you before it became so commercial. I think Dembow still has that. And that's the reason why Dembow is the music that young people in the barrios here identify with. Because it talks about the day-to-day, the thoughts, the feelings of the young people in the barrios. It's a music that is fundamentally anchored to that, to what's happening in the impoverished neighborhoods in our country. Reggaeton, on the other hand, not so much anymore. I would say nowadays reggaeton is more of a romantic genre, and Dembow is almost never romantic really. And when it is romantic, it is so in a way that we wouldn't really call romantic. It is so in an explicit way. There are even people that compare, and check this out because what I'm going to say is going to sound a little controversial for some. But there are people that compare Dembow with punk, because Dembow is also a type of music that people say is very noisy and irreverent, that it goes against society's moral standards, because nobody expects that somebody is going to be that explicit in a song about the things that they see out there. I also think that Dembow is also different from reggaeton in the sounds, because the sounds are very important in music. I mean, you can have a rhythm, and if I make it by clapping my hands, it's going to sound totally different than if I make it with a drum. So I would say that Dembow has more aggressive sounds than reggaeton, that it has more aggressivity. It sounds more noisy. For instance, in Dembow, you sometimes find the sound of cans, just like if you were playing an empty can of corn. I really love Dembow. I would love to make more Dembow in my career.
During our conversation, Andres told Inka that he seemed to remember hearing about trans and LGBTQI artists in Dembow.
I know that there are people from the LGBTQI community that have made Dembow. That has also surprised some. And of course, you have people like Tokisha, who is one of the most popular performers right now and who has identified herself as bisexual. So you do find them.
Le estamos dando clase, el Caribe se escuela negra.
Rico como una empanada de jamón y queso. No somos caretas aunque estemos en carnaval. Feliz como Juanita cuando vino de regreso. Súbele el volumen si te pones a bailar.
Inka has an incredibly informative and important thread pinned on his Twitter where he gets into the history of genocide and slavery and discusses how Black culture has been preserved as a process of resistance. You should go follow his page and check it out. In that thread, he also discusses anti-Blackness and highlights the aspects of Black music that show up in rhythms like reggaeton. We asked Inka to talk about some of the instruments and sounds that come from Black culture and that influence reggaeton.
I created that thread, I think, in the middle of the pandemic, during that difficult part of the pandemic where we didn't even know what was going to happen to us. So not only I started to produce music, I also started to investigate, to read, to watch videos about the Afro-descendant culture of the Dominican Republic and other countries in Latin America. There has been an effort to widen the culture of these countries and to not highlight and not to give the proper and deserved support and appreciation to Afro-descendant culture. Of course, that's because, as we know, we live in a racist system. I learned a couple of things in college that helped me see under the structure of the system. I said to myself, what haven't I seen from my own culture? I suddenly found myself in Google, searching about the culture of Villamella, which is the place where I live. And then I discovered that there are many things that need to be told and shared. For instance, original instruments, and I'm not talking about the conga, the bongo, or even the tambora, which is the most known Dominican instrument. I'm instead talking about other percussion instruments that are built by the Afro-descendant communities, usually by the elders in an artisanal way. I'm talking about instruments such as the balsier, which is a drum that you play while sitting on it. It's very interesting. The drummer sits on the drum and play with their hands, and they also put their heel on the drum, almost like nailing the drum with their heel in order to change the tuning of the drum. Or the mongo with an M, an instrument similar to the bongo with a B, which is used in a traditional Dominican music genre. I also discovered that we also have a genre called Congo de Villamella. In Congo de Villamella, there's an instrument called conguito. And what this instrument does in the songs they play is precisely the rhythm that I have heard so much in reggaeton. My mind exploded when I became aware of the similarities. Because, of course, everybody says that reggaeton comes from reggae and reggae comes from dancehall. But in reality, these rhythms that are present in dancehall and in reggae are also present in other rhythms. In other words, it's like a rhythm that's present in different branches of Afro-descendant music. And I got really interested when I saw that this rhythm is also present in that Afro-Dominican genre that remained here through the resistance of enslaved people. And that genre has remained to this day without a lot of support, although I should say without any support at all from the government. It remains only because of those people who created it and passed it down in oral form. Parents who teach their children, a sibling teach the other sibling, and then they teach their cousins, and that's how they learn how to make and play the instruments and how to make music. So, all of those things led me to think. They made me believe more strongly and with more basis that reggaeton is Afro-descendant music, as well as Dembow, that we make a lot of here in the Dominican Republic. Reggaeton is really Afro-descendant music not only because it's created mostly by Afro-descendant people, but also because it has embedded a rhythm that came from Afro-descendant resistance.
¿Y qué fue? No hiciste nada. Con tanta chapa, va a hacerle ranking can. ¿Y qué fue?
Our last guest, Cris Moreno, is a dancer from the Dominican Republic who has lived in New York since age 5. I think we can safely say he's a full-blown New Yorker. Cris has been dancing to Afro-Latin rhythms since he was a young teenager and has gotten into teaching reggaeton in recent years. We lean on Cris to help us understand reggaeton movement. Cris, how would you describe the dance to someone who is familiar with the music but unfamiliar with reggaeton movement?
The thing is, it all depends on the song. Yes, it depends on what the artist is saying. It depends on what they're saying or what they're trying to portray through their voice. Yeah, and you can always tell between a song where it's very sad and you hear the artist saying, "Oh my gosh, she broke up with me, and then I don't know what to do with myself. Blah blah blah. I've been doing this and that. I miss her." Other songs are talking about, "Wow, she looks fine. She is sexy. Oh my goodness, how can I talk to her?" Other songs are a little bit more just intense with all that crazy other stuff. So when it comes to someone who's trying to learn how to dance reggaeton and trying to learn what they're saying, I say that it's similar to lyrical dancing, just not lines. It's more of grounded bass, a similar movement of African dance, a similar movement of hip hop, similar movement of house. House is very grounded, very groovy, very flowy. Reggaeton is almost the same thing. The only difference is just adding a lot more rhythm with the hips. Yes, there's a lot of hip movement in reggaeton. A lot of it. Same way how there is hip movement in Afrobeats. In Afrobeats, a lot of hip movements. Yes, a lot of shoulder movements. It stems from knowing how to like connect your your feelings and your emotions with the artist, so you're able to portray and create that visual with your body.
We know reggaeton is heavily influenced by reggae, hip-hop, dancehall, house, and other genres and dance styles. We asked Cris to say more about how these dance styles fuse with reggaeton dancing.
Every style has a particular same move. It all depends on the musicality. It all depends on speed. It all depends on rhythm. I could take a reggaeton move that has to do with the count, with the knees coming in, and the bass goes doom, katu, katum, katu, katum, katu, katum, right? Now let's say I'm playing house. House go boom, katum, kum, tukutukutum, katum, kum, tum, kum, tukutukutum. Same thing, just faster movement. The movement is the same. I'm just changing the speed. I'm just changing the timing, and I'm just changing the way I'm making the step. The hip rotation stays the same. The beat, the rhythm is what makes it different. And that's how I feel like it's influenced. The gem for me is that all these moves that we have and all these styles is just portrayed in different sounds, in different rhythms of the movement. So when you're able to at least play a genre and you do that same step that comes from that genre, it's gonna tie in. Why? Because they all have drums. They all have certain percussion instruments that it could give you that feeling. And most of it is because of the heart. And you know how the heart beats? Yes? These percussions are beats. As long as you feel that beat, that heart is gonna move. You feel me?
Agarren a su pareja por la cintura y prepárense. Porque lo que viene no está fácil. No está fácil, ¿no? Ya. Hey. Yo quiero bailar, tú quieres sudar y pegarte a mí, el cuerpo rosado.
You might be thinking of these descriptions with the visual of a solo interpretation of the dance, but you can dance reggaeton solo or with a partner. We asked Cris to elaborate on how he sees the characteristics of solo and partner dancing in reggaeton.
When it comes to dancing to a just solo, you have to be bigger, you have to be more presentable, you have to tell your story with what you're trying to say. Yeah. You had to move particularly in order for the visual for the other person to see exactly what you're trying to tell them, exactly what they're trying to feel, what you're trying to feel. So that's when you're dancing it by yourself, you're watching me and you're saying, whoa, I understand everything you're telling me. That was amazing. I am going to say this though, dancing by yourself is it's much harder because you have to legit present bigger. Yes, you have to work more. Now, that's with a partner. If it's, let's say, the character that I did by myself, I could legit do it with my partner also. Now, with my partner, with a partner, you still have to be even bigger because now you got to take care of your partner's style and movement so that you could look the same and move unison. Now, you have two different styles of partner dancing in reggaeton. You have the house style, which is house party, and you have commercial style, which is legit teaching you basic steps, teaching you movement with the partner, learning how to play with each other's weight, because that's an important thing, because if you don't know how to play with each other's weight, you're going to hurt each other even further. Dancing with the partner is also super fun, because dancing by yourself is also stressing, to be honest with you, bro. Because you imagine you gotta be like, oh man, I missed that movement. Oh well, you know what I'm saying? You start thinking about yourself. But when you dance with a partner, it's less thinking because now you're legit saying, you got me. Let's go. You know? Dancing in a particular closer way, that's all about the image. Almost like silhouettes. If we're able to move together, it looks very entertaining.
There's a term in reggaeton we typically hear called perreo. Katelina and Cris shared what perreo means to them.
Perreo is a creation that bodies have manifested. I would say it's a continuation of Jamaican toasting, but even more so, it incorporates like this dance style that inherently is at the nucleus of what we call reggaeton, in that it coincides with the BPM of reggaeton. It coincides with algunos estilos, artísticos de bomba y plena, que es muy boricua. It's sexy. It's the sexy as like movement that came out of the celebration of the structuring of reggaeton as created by Puerto Rican people. That's what I would call perreo to be. All perreo is reggaeton, but all reggaeton isn't perreo, in that a lot of reggaeton is too far out there, too pop, to have any sort of semblance of this sort of celebration that we have with our cintura, with our ass, which is required in order to perrear, right? There are some songs that are too far out there to be considered perreo. But on the flip side, all perreo music is reggaeton, in that it's celebrating this movement in this way, and therefore officially what the genre is reggaeton, but it's a very specific type of it.
For me, perreo is basically grounded, crazy rotation of the hips in a nice particular movement of the song that's giving you that rhythm. You know how it goes? If you're able to hit that and really show those hits, oh my God, that's perreo to me, because perreo is legit saying, like a rotation. I see a circle. I hear a circle. I feel a circle. The word the to me sounds like a circle. Think about it. If you're repeating like this in like a up and down motion of your tongue saying perreo, right? If you end up perreo, it's a circle. So therefore, very grounded circular motion in a nice heavy set tone. Yeah, that's to me perreo is. Now, with a partner, that's even more of a intense, allowing the hips of the rotation of the follower, going around while you're moving your upper body and lower hips, just in the Caribbeans.
As you know, the objective of our podcast is to center the contributions of Black people in music and culture from an anti-racist perspective. After the murder of George Floyd, Katelina reports that as a result of the social justice movement that followed, she gained visibility related to the work she had been doing on her platform. Part of this work included a playlist called Reggaetón, which highlights the music of Black women. We asked her to talk about this.
Reggaeton is a concept. I gotta give the flowers to Zaira Kelly. We were having a casual conversation, and I was like, I want to give negras a lane, and I don't know how to name it. And she was like, what about Reggaeton? And I was like, oh, that's perfect. And initially, I misunderstood her concept. I was like, okay, this is to celebrate Black people. She's like, no, Black women. And, it was throughout that conversation that I had the courage to say this out loud, because it's something that I often knew, but yo nunca quería aceptar, because it's honestly really sad. Hombres negros, sí hay. There's a lot of Black men in reggaeton. Zagny Lennox, Baby Ranks, Cafubanto, Nano Boom. Dios, my mind is exploding with who I have to say next. Pero mujeres negras, you stop at a certain point. When we're talking about reggaeton, no el movimiento, pero reggaeton, right? And that's very specific, especially as reggaeton has become whitewashed, and, a lot of these white artists have been, conceptualized to be the perfect product to sell to the masses. It's on purpose that Black women have been left out of that, So in which case, Reggaeton is a concept that came out of that. There's like less than 10%, and 10 is actually very generous. I want to say 5, but for our own test of purposes, less than 10% of reggaetoneras are Black women. And that's wild to me, because you see our aesthetics everywhere. The aesthetic of the reggaetonera is ghetto fab, basically. And esas uñas, esa jerga, los movimientos, todo eso viene de una mujer negra. And you see everything about us except us. And that's very sad. Outside of me, there's Party with Nami, La Sista, who's been here since the beginning, she still sings. There's Demfra of La Factoria. Ayan Yuri, who she's not, but for all intents and purposes, like Afro-mestiza quizá. There is Melaner. There is I Am Leslie, una boricua mexicana o dominicana. Gale La Molleta. Claro, hay Toquisha, que está matando con el perreo. And yeah, I hope to see this conversation grow and for more Black women to see themselves as a part of the reggaeton imagination.
Oye, en la Vallarta está el alcalde con DJ Joe. Metiéndole cabrón, oye, esto es para ustedes, para que se lo...
I am so blown away by the knowledge and gems, as Chris would say, that we've gotten from our guests. These conversations have offered both an unlearning of what I thought I knew about reggaeton, or what popular culture has pumped out, and a deep learning into the roots of this rhythm. I can't explain how full I am from this.
Yeah! A mí me gusta mucho que every time we create one of our second season episodes, I can expand and root my relationship with these rhythms. It's really a beautiful experience that changes how I dance and how I feel the music every single time we learn. I really hope our listeners can also embark in this journey of discovery and of paying respects to the originators of the rhythms we all love and that have now been fully commercialized. What a boring world it would be without all this culture that we have been fortunate to inherit.
I completely agree. It is seriously a deep and rich culture, and I'm so glad we were able to dig into another rhythm. Before ending, we definitely want to thank Katelina, Beth, Inka, and Chris for their contribution to this episode. We're always grateful to make new friends with every single episode. Please, 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 please go follow them and support their work.
Muchas gracias desde el fondo de mi corazón. You made this experience unforgettable. And for our listeners, look out in the coming weeks for extended interviews and where you listen in episodes. We have some great content coming to continue to center our knowledgeable and beautiful Afro-descendant voices. Thank you for listening. This is Mixtape.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. To listen to the songs featured in this episode and songs featured in other episodes, check out the Season 2 playlist, which can be found at our website, tarheels.live/mixtapepodcast. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at mixtape.podcast, as well as Twitter and YouTube, which are easily accessed through our website. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for all our new episodes. Have any suggestions, questions, or comments? Email us at themixtapepodcast@gmail.com. You can also send audio clips of your reflections to the content to be featured on our episode. Thanks for listening. This is Mixtape.